If you aren't focusing on global warming, you're rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic.
We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. It's on loan from our children.
We have a higher concentration of wealth in the United States than ever in recorded American history.
Give until it hurts. If you can't feel it, you haven't given enough. It's just that simple.
My name's Jacque Francis, and this is the importance of climate philanthropy, and it's AKA how do we get more money into climate solutions by activating more people to give. So my name's Jacque Francis, and I'm the executive director of the Global Warming Mitigation Project. It's also called the Keeling Curve Prize, and I'm also an investor, an activist, and a philanthropist myself. The Keeling Curve Prize has given out $1.75 million over the last 6 years, and that has turned into additional investment of a little greater than $1.2 billion. And then we've also had self-reported estimated CO2e numbers of reducing, removing, or replacing 3.2 gigatons of CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalency, which is self-reported numbers, but it's an amazing number. We have an internship program that is called the Constellations Fellowship. We've had over 4,600 applicants, and we put 150 paid fellows annually into career pathways. In about a week, we're having an online database launched, which is called the Conduit. And we have over 1,100 programs and projects that have applied for the Keeling Curve Prize that will be on this database. And we're going to be turning this into carbon abatement portfolios in the future. So it's going to be an offset, an inset, a philanthropy, and an investment play. So any of you who are talking about your ideas, you should apply for the Keeling Curve Prize. And then the panel here next to me is Spike Buckley, Dr. Laurie Michaels, John Powers, and Dr. Jason Franklin. I'm sorry, Jason Franklin. So I have some notes on them, but they said they want to actually introduce themselves. So we're going to start with my friend Spike Buckley.
I'm sure I'm the least distinguished on the panel. I sort of dived in. I've been involved in climate stuff for maybe a decade or so, but 4 years ago I had an event in Aspen called Earth's Call. Brought in about 700 people, various experts in the environmental space, and had a 2 or 3 day conference, and then followed that with the founding of an organization called One Earth, oneearth.org, and I've moved on from One Earth to Jacque's organization. I'm on the board there now. So I guess that's enough on me, I think. Well, I'm a business guy, basically, been involved in commercial real estate for 40 years and have property around the country. But my heart and soul are into trying to do whatever I can to heal the planet and to promote democracy. And you'll hear more about that, possibly from John Powers, so that's who I am. Next.
Hi, I'm Laurie Michaels. I shut my psychology practice in 2012 and started another organization called Open Road Alliance. And the only part of that that is particularly important here is that Open Road Alliance still exists, and about half of its portfolio is to make short-term bridge loans to climate organizations. So if you're raising a Series C, it gets delayed, you know the money's coming, Open Road will give you a loan at lower than market rate. So that's just a shout out for Open Road. After doing that for about 8 years, I decided that it was getting a little bit routine. I'm actually not a finance person. The finance people ran it a lot better than I did. And I wanted to work on climate with my longtime business partner, Maya Winkelstein. Some of you saw her yesterday moderating the CCS panel. And we looked at each other, we said, okay, what's next? And it clearly has to be climate, because climate is foundational to everything else, obviously, on this, any other project anybody wants to do, and everybody in this room knows that. So what was important to me about starting a project was that it was right-sized to the kinds of resources I have to devote to it. It allowed me to actually get involved in some way, in a very kind of more operational way. I like to be hands-on. I like to be involved. I'm not so interested in high-level conversations about what is possible. I want to know what's possible on the ground. And a state that I have loved for many years is Louisiana. I am also motivated heavily by perceived injustice in the world. Not perceived, actual injustice in the world. So I decided that we were going to go to work in Cancer Alley, which is about 100 miles between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, in which there are 130 petrochemical plants in all of those holdings, which used to be slave plantations. As you can see, Louisiana didn't really change its stripes. It just kind of moved on into a more industrial, into industry. So that's what the 2030 Fund does. We work with local organizations. Obviously, we're carpetbaggers, so we're there to support the organizations that are doing the work on the ground. Louisiana is actually very well organized. Their community organization groups are top-notch, and so there's a real solid ground with which to work with. And so we look at some politics, we look at down ballot, we look at get out the vote. At the moment, we're looking at how to prevent CCS from allowing the permitting of another 30 or so industrial plants in that area. CCS provides greenwashing, which allows the governors to say, yeah, we're going to permit these things, and don't you worry about it, because there isn't going to be any carbon that is going to get produced from this, which is all hogwash. But anyway, that is the work that I'm doing now. It fits me, it fits how I like to work, and I'm suggesting it to people out there as a way to think about how you might in your communities go out and start going after some kind of a problem.
I'm John Powers. I try to organize my thinking in 3 steps. One is, why do I want to do something? What am I going to do, and how am I going to do it? Why? We have an existential threat. If you aren't focusing on global warming, you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's life support. So what am I going to do about that? I had the chance to join the Environmental Grantmakers Association early on through a foundation, introduced an environmental program into it, which is now primarily focused on global warming. So that's the side of the grant-giving side. I've also been involved with starting 2 nonprofits. The oldest one is the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, now known as the Alliance for Collective Action, which has a building in Denver with pre-pandemic 50 sustainability groups in it, and a LEED certified historic building. Now post-pandemic, we've got 32 something. What are we doing there? We're getting people to work together synergistically, co-location, share ideas more efficiently, both in time and in money. So then how we're doing something. So I'm just saying that in my point, I've been on the side of grant giving and on the side of grant seeking. So if there's anything that we can do up here that would tell you how you could do things on your own, every one of us. And how many of you heard the panel that I was on yesterday? Yeah, sorry about that. I just going to repeat something that
That's why they came today.
Every one of you is a grant giver. Every one of you has a chance to do it. Every one of you goes through the same mental process that anybody who's in a formal structure goes through. You know, what am I doing? Do I like what they're doing? Do they need the money? And every one of you get sitting at dinner and you get a phone call from somebody, and you're going to go through that same process. So hopefully you will learn something from our thinking of why we're doing it, what we're doing it, and how we're doing, that you could apply to yourself. If there's any success this panel would be to inspire you, give you tools, or give our contact information to you so that you can come up and do more. But if we don't get our life support system secure, and it's not just, when I say our, I mean that expansively, not just for humankind, but life on the planet, all the pieces that are necessary to keep life functioning. People say, let's say your house is on fire, right? And you show up with a bucket of water and you start throwing buckets of water on it, and someone says, why are you just throwing buckets of water? Your house is on fire. I got to save some for later. The climate, the planet's on fire. So dig deep. You're going to be saving money for what? If there's not something left, if our life support systems are gone. So every one of us needs to get outside, particularly the mentality of a private foundation, when you only give away 5%. Or in any of our lives or whatever, you're going to leave it for money for my children. Well, sure, I get that. But what kind of life support systems are your children going to have if we don't come to the fire with the right amount of water, and if we expend it all now, we put the fire out, but then we still have something we can rebuild with, and if we save it for later, there won't be anything later to save it for. And that's why I'm so pleased that Jason Franklin is here with us today. And I am passing the microphone.
No pressure.
Over to Jason.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Franklin. I live in Michigan these days. Relevant for introduction, I got involved in philanthropy when I got a phone call from my grandfather's secretary when I was 22 saying, your grandfather's decided to let the younger generations get involved in the family foundation. Are you interested? I said, sure. What family foundation? It was the worst form of generational transition possible. I do not advise it to any of you. But I said yes, like anybody who is asked, do you want to give away money? The answer is yes. And that family foundation is very small. I get my share out of 23 blood descendants is I get to give $3,000 a year away. But it was just enough to be in spaces with trustees, and I often say I've leveraged my privilege to the hilt. I did my PhD looking at the role of philanthropy and policy change, ran a group called Boulder Giving to inspire people to give big and take more risks with their giving. That's Boulder as in to be bold, not Boulder, Colorado, which was actually one of the inspirations for the Bill and Melinda Gates, for them to launch the Giving Pledge. I was then the Kellogg Chair in Community Philanthropy, studying collective giving, pooled funds, donor funds, and today run a philanthropic advising firm called Ktisis Capital that works to move money to racial, social, economic, and environmental justice.
What does Ktisis mean?
Ktisis, she was the Byzantine goddess of generosity. And you could trace part of my family history back to that part of the world.
Okay, so my question to you guys, and I'm kind of I'm messing with you right now. I'm not going to ask the questions that I was telling you I was going to ask, because in the last panel they talked a lot about what needs to happen to make success possible, and I started listening to a lot of they need more people educating on how to do regenerative agriculture, and that was sort of their biggest kind of the impediment to success right now. I'm sure there's other things as well. Obviously, in the climate crisis, we're going to have weather issues that are, catastrophe. So one of the reasons I used a prize structure is because I can have 12 analysts that work for me. They help identify, what are the best solutions in the world, and it's a very robust and strict way of how we give out our money. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think are the biggest challenges to any solutions out there? And how do you use your vehicle or your mechanism or your money to combat those challenges? Spike, I'm sorry, Spike?
Yeah, well, so I may look at it too simplistically, but I think the biggest single problem is that, or maybe let me turn that around. The biggest opportunity is one of changing our mindset. I think the problem that we've got, and this is the result being a business guy and, you know, operating in the trenches for a long time, which is sort of kill or be killed. You learn a lot about the way the capitalist system works. And this system relies on never-ending growth and sort of a zero-sum game. There are winners, there are losers. In my view, what we've got to do somehow is almost go back in time. The greatest generation, which, you know, Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation, which was my parents, they seemed to be a little more focused on others than themselves. We've become a generation, it seems to me, of me, myself, and mine. So I would say until we can flip the paradigm and become more focused on giving than taking, we're going to continue to have the problem, and pretty much a problem that has no solution. There's a quote I really like, and I don't believe it's ever been attributed to a single individual. I think this is something that started long ago, and so I'll paraphrase. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. It's on loan from our children. And this is something I think needs to be grasped, especially by those who have the most. It's a game now, I think, of having to figure out how to give and not to take. And that can happen at all levels. I ride my bike around Cherry Creek where I live all the time, and I had the interesting experience maybe a month or so ago. I rode by a bus stop, and there was a guy, and this is an absolute true story. There's a guy at the bus stop waiting for the bus, and he looked like a normal person who probably couldn't afford a car, and he was riding the bus. And a homeless guy came up to him, and this is definitely a homeless guy, you know, the shopping cart and everything, all his possessions in the shopping cart, that sort of thing, and hit up the guy at the bus stop for money. And the guy at the bus stop reached into his wallet, pulled out a $10 bill, and gave it to him. That was really impactful as far as I was concerned, because I am fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to rub elbows with some incredibly wealthy people. The sacrifice that guy made at the bus stop was greater, in my view, than one of these ultra-wealthy people handing off $100,000 or $200,000 to a cause. And that, I think, is where we really have to go if we're going to deal with a climate crisis. And I won't get into the whole democracy thing now because that's kind of switching gears, but certainly with respect to the climate crisis. And I have told Jacque and others that when I've gone to ask someone of means to contribute to something, I like to ask one question. And the answer to that question is going to tell me whether I turn and walk away right away or I continue the conversation. And that question is simply, what means more to you? Your children's future or your bank account? What is it? It's really simple. It's not complicated at all. And if there's hesitation, I've got my answer. So it really is, there is a desperate need to switch the way we're thinking and not become a species, in the case mostly in the United States, of taking, but flip that and figure out how you can give. And it doesn't matter how much. It really doesn't. There are people who are capable of giving $5 or $10 like the guy at the bus stop, and there are people capable of giving $1 billion or billions. And that has to happen if we're going to get out of this mess. There's another quote I really like that came from Mother Teresa, and I'm going to have to paraphrase here because this has been, there are various versions of this all over the place. But, and again, paraphrasing, she once said, you must give until it hurts, until you can feel it. If you can't feel it, it's not really a gift. But then it goes on, and she was actually talking about love, but I think in this context, if we're talking about money, it's the same thing. And you take that a step further, and she later said, after saying, give until it hurts, then give some more. So I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I really think that there's a mindset shift that has to occur. And it's not that difficult. And I'm not saying that people should give away all their earthly possessions, but they have to start thinking more about giving than taking if we're going to get out of this mess.
I guess, whilst I fully endorse everything that Ike said.
Skip.
But, sorry. I think, once again, on a more operational level, if we look at Louisiana, I think that one of the things that really stands in the way is that the people of Louisiana, many of them, do not believe that they can take back power, and they can. These officials who are giving huge property tax breaks to petrochemical plants, and believe that they live in an oil and gas state and that their livelihoods depend on oil and gas being there to provide jobs, people can come to understand that, one, that's not true. 6% of the tax revenue for Louisiana comes from oil and gas only. 2% of the population is employed by oil and gas. But it is a state where the narrative has continued because people, I think that we have not, by we, I don't mean that, people have not yet been able to fully empower the communities, because when those communities are empowered, and believe me, they are rising up, they will throw out the parish council members, as they are starting to do. They will demand of oil and gas the millions in property tax rebates. They will demand those back, and they will demand that their public service commission, which are also elected officials, do the right thing in regulating Entergy, which is the main utility in Louisiana. So all of these are very practical kinds of steps that can be taken. And at this point, I think it is a narrative that is shifting. And it will shift in Louisiana. I'm just hoping that we can get Louisiana to shift before, more disasters happen. And I think the other thing that I would say to what gets in the way of climate philanthropy is that oil and gas companies lie. And you really, they have a persuasive argument that they like to put out there that they're working on renewables, when in fact the amount of money they put into renewables, as we all know, is minuscule. And our government subsidizes it. So I think there's a lot of things in the way. But for me, on a very local, practical level, it's changing minds and hearts and voting patterns.
A friend of mine said that if you don't like what's happening governmentally or in politics, and you don't vote, you lose your bitching rights. Okay, so the only way you get enfranchised is to vote and to participate. So Spike and I are working on a thing called the Climate Democracy Initiative, which is also a 501c3 nonprofit, the other side of the table. Why? Because we believe that if we don't get governments at all levels, both domestically and internationally, engaged with their full force behind addressing the climate catastrophe, that we're not going to make the progress we need. And part of that means you got to protect voting rights so that democracy is unfettered. In fact, we have to evolve democracy to be able to deal with the scale of the climate problems that we're facing. So we really encourage you all to get involved politically. Nobody who is going to try to be effective on dealing with the climate catastrophe is going to be effective unless you get on the field and you get other people on the field. 4 million Americans turn to voting age every year. That's 16 million voters between presidential elections. And this is one of the reasons why the Republicans are trying to raise the voting age. Are you guys getting involved? I'm saying we all have to do this. We have to get involved with politics. If we don't, we're not going to achieve the level of success. And who's the common element that's got the black hat? It's the fossil fuel industry. So Climate Democracy Initiative, I think we don't have the expertise to say that we should be Climate Democracy and Media Initiative, because the amount of disinformation that's out there that is corrupting everything you can possibly think of. It's corruption, right? Comes from the fossil fuel industry. On the one hand, they want to prevent regulation, right? They don't want government to be able to impose regulations on them. So they want to weaken government to the point where they can impose regulations, which is why they're trying to implode government. At the same point, they're making very active efforts to block requirements to act on climate. So they're the source of disinformation about climate denial. They're the source of disinformation about what's happening politically, the big lie, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why we're doing it, what we're doing it, how we're doing it, as we're trying to make a hub of climate and democracy in Colorado, hubs in other states, Arizona in particular, looking at Georgia, to try to get people to create these climate democracy hubs to get people activated and participating in the political system.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I spend 50% of my time on democracy and 40% of my time on environment and climate and 10% on everything else. So we cannot advance one without the other and vice versa. But in terms of the biggest hurdles for philanthropy overall, I would say 3 things: inequality, options, and ego. When I say inequality, I often will say we are living in the second golden age of philanthropy because we are living in the second golden age of inequality. We have a higher concentration of wealth in the United States than ever in recorded American history. And as a result of that concentration of wealth, we have all lost perspective on that concentration of wealth. I regularly talk to people who are millionaires or even billionaires who feel poor because they compare themselves to someone with more. I try to say numbers. I try to be open. My personal current net worth is about $2.4 million. Last year, I helped move $64 million of other people's money. It is very easy to feel poor when I'm moving way more than I will ever have. And it makes every individual think that if I can't be moving money at the scale of Bill Gates, it doesn't matter. When we know we can have massive impact with whatever level of giving. You know, if you concentrate in a specific place, as Laurie was talking about with New Orleans and with Louisiana, it is one of the most essential states to pivot the climate fight. And there are very narrow races, like 2 races to break the supermajority, which will change, 3 races to flip the Public Service Commission, which will change regulations. And the cost of each of those races is in 6 figures, not 7. So the chance to shift the entire trajectory of an entire state is probably less than $2 million in a handful of very targeted investments. The second piece that I think is a problem is the options. I regularly hear from people analysis paralysis. There are so many good and important things I could give to. I need to figure out the best. We all need to let go of the best and just pick a good. I regularly tell clients that I work with, as long as you have done some basic research, your money will not go to waste. And if it didn't get the perfect result, you will have more money and you can give to something else next year. But we get stuck in the moment of trying to find the best thing to invest in or the best thing to give in without realizing there are so many amazing opportunities that need more than we will ever be able to give. So finding a trusted advisor, finding a pooled fund that's got capable leadership, and being able to trust them to get yourself past that analysis paralysis into action is a second key hurdle. And the third is ego. I regularly hear from donors, I've heard over the course of the last 2 days, as much as we all try, we all need to be the hero of our own story. And we regularly end up sharing stories as if we are Superman rather than as a part of a Justice League. I have found the solution to climate. Nobody has the solution to the climate crisis. We have 10,000 contributions that could collectively avert the climate crisis. It will not be farming, it will not be oil, it will not be politics, it will not be any of these things, it will be all of them. And we need to hold the humility to say that we are doing our part to a broader peace, and we also have to push ourselves. The other dynamic, coming back to inequality, is that we end up in very white, very privileged spaces that skew our understanding of the situation that we're facing. If you sit and work in deep relationship with communities of color, with indigenous leaders, with working class people, you get different perspectives on the same problems. And we need to have the humility to go and learn, not go and tell people what they need to be doing and able to make change.
Jason, can I? Just one statistic to bolster what Jason said about inequality. John and I were at a democracy conference in Athens last week. We were there for a week. And one of the statistics that was revealed during that conference was that 8 individuals control more wealth than half the population of the globe. So we need to understand what's going on here. And we need to understand that, or statistics like that, to figure out how to redirect resources in one way or another. But that's a problem when you've got 8 individuals who are effectively worth more than, economically speaking, than half the population of the globe.
And I was talking with the child of one of those 8 individuals a couple weeks ago, and they said that they could afford this year to give $3 million.
It's ridiculous.
Afford is the wrong word. But also, I would challenge each of you. We will laugh at that, right? A billionaire that says they can only afford to give $3 million. But I hear the exact same thing from people who make $100,000 a year and say they can afford to give $50, right when they have just paid $200 for a fancy meal that they did not budget in advance. If you didn't have to budget for it, you can afford it.
And it comes back, Jason, to the statement that I made earlier from Mother Teresa. Give until you hurt. Give until it hurts. If you can't feel it, you haven't given enough. It's just that simple.
One other thought is you would say to whom to give it. Yep. Now, one of the things that we recommend is you find people you believe in and therefore extend that belief to their organization. Now, if you believe in them and you're in a foundation setting and you're receiving an application, remember, we're all donors, right? So you're all going to get pitched. You're going to be asked to support the organization, and they'll say, which of the projects is going to capture your interest? And the recommendation, and I want to thank Dennis Moynihan for tuning me up on this, is to give general support. Yeah. Gee, what's the most important thing to you? Write it up. Well, why write it up? Just give it to somebody you believe in. And don't do it for 1 year at a time. The people will build infrastructure, they'll advance programs, and now you see it, now you don't. That's not a formula for success. So 2 takeaways: long-term support over years, general support. And if you don't know who to give to and you have a certain interest, That's when you go to somebody like Jason or talk to your peers or whatever. But give, and give now, because there won't be anything to give to later if we don't get ahead of this.
One of our favorite sayings is, there ain't no roof rack on a hearse.
You don't see a shroud
folksy.
with pockets.
So one more statistic that I'm going to throw out there is that globally, less than 2% of philanthropic dollars go to the climate. And so I want to say, how can you guys activate others, and how can we collectively communicate the importance of climate philanthropy specifically?
Could I start with a quick anecdote? My cousin's husband became the head of the National Endowment of the Arts under Obama. Right? So I'm getting facing off with him. He's, we got to have more money for the arts. And I said, well, yeah, we got to have more money for our life support systems. Oh, remember Shakespeare, I tell him. Life is nothing but a stage upon which men and women are merely players. Do you know what that stage is? It's our life support systems. You have no life support systems. You don't have arts, you don't have industry, you don't have anything. Do you know there's more money goes into the arts that goes into environment, no less into climate? Why are you doing what you're doing? What are you going to do, and how are you going to do it?
So I rarely do this, but I disagree with John Powers.
Can we take this outside?
And I agree at the same time. But I have rarely found, in the face of trying to organize somebody to give to climate, to tell them that what they are giving to is not worth it. Because people engage, giving is a way that we give meaning to our money. Somebody who's passionate about the ballet, or somebody who's passionate about K-12 education, or passionate about their local neighborhood, they're not going to let go of the thing that they care about. So my amendment, if not disagreement, is actually trying to draw connections. It's been the one I've been making over and over around democracy funding for the last few years. People will say, Jason, my focus is on public education, my focus is on the arts, my focus is on climate. I said, great. You will not achieve momentum in the issue you care about if we do not have a functioning democracy to distribute resources effectively to the things you care about. If they say my interest is around public education, I say, great. If we are not doing public education around climate, we are not preparing them with the fundamental goal of education, which is to be engaged members of society as adults. So I find that linking lets you unlock, and then the other piece is around what we've all been talking about in different ways, is the question of abundance and scarcity. Helping people work through the sense that they don't have enough to get them feeling capable enough to give more. You know, I will often ask people, like, I would ask you each right now to think about how much could you give this year? You got a number in mind? How much could you give financially this year? And then my second question, what would change if you gave 10% more? And for many people, they realize that actually nothing would change in their day-to-day life. If you engage in enough of those types of conversations, if you engage in the planning to get people to a place of personal security, it enables them to feel a sense of abundance that they become more engaged and active donors.
That's why Jason is the professor of climate philanthropy. So we have about 13 minutes on the clock right there. I'd like to open it up to questions, and then we'll have some final comments from the panel. How's that sound? Okay, can we turn up the lights and see if there are any questions? This woman in the middle?
I can project.
We can repeat back.
Thank you for this panel. This has been really important. My work has been in the Amazon basin for the last 30 years. And, you know, what I find is that when we have victories, significant advances, is because we built the movement and we have long-term commitments. Rarely we get a serious victory less than 5 years, and most of them 10 to 15 years. What is the trend in getting foundations to do more long-term support? And that was my one question. My second follow-up is that in Indigenous Peoples Days tomorrow, we're going to have a whole program about it. And I've been also on the board of foundations where we've tried really hard to move resources to territories. You say climate philanthropy is 2%. Indigenous peoples who are
the solution to biodiversity crisis, paradigm shift, and climate solutions, and are standing between us and fossil fuels, are getting 0.8 of 1% of philanthropy, of all the philanthropy that goes for climate and biodiversity. And most of the time, they don't have professional fundraisers. So how do we make, to your question, how do we get resources to the front lines? How do we do it long term? How do we invest in movements?
Here in Boulder, I don't know how many people here are based in Boulder, but there's an organization called Global Green Grants. Tosin knows that, and Jason's been doing consulting with them. So commandeering the topic, I'm going to ask Jason to tell you all about Global Green Grants.
So Global Green Grants funds frontline environmental justice work all over the globe, community organizing groups, many indigenous as well as local organizing. And also to think about Global Green Grants as one example. There's Native Voices Rising, there's the 7th Generation Fund, there's Land is Life. There are networks both based in the US and based around the world that are spending their time learning about all of the local work so that you can give to them to help move those resources and not have to. We all like to think we can become the experts in everything, but they are spending all of their day versus the 1 hour a month that many of us will spend on our philanthropy, understanding the complexity and picking groups that are led by communities of color, that are led by leaders in those own communities matters. I say 2 other things. One is we have to stop thinking that long-term funding is a 2-year grant. Mid-term funding is 3 years, long-term is 10. A friend of mine just made a set of 10 20-year grants to different communities. 20-year grant is truly long-term. 5 to 10, as Atosa was saying, is really the minimum duration for a social movement or a mobilizing effort to really achieve true impact and change. The work in any state, the work in any issue is going to take that duration, and we need to think in that duration, and then we need to change our metrics to evaluate progress over that same time period.
Let's go over here. Oh, we've got somebody in the back. Okay, yes.
I have given and been part of organizations that have received unrestricted donations. I have my own answer to the question, but would like to hear from John or any of the rest of you why you think unrestricted donations are particularly empowering to an organization and why they should be made.
I can give you one answer to that. So the deal between a funder and an organization, whether it's a social entrepreneur or it's a nonprofit, should be a contractual one, no different than any other business. So that instead of paying for or investing into an organization because I want dollars back, I'm investing in an organization because I want social ROI. And therefore, in any situation where I would not be telling this organization how they should return my social ROI, I wouldn't do it with a business and I wouldn't do it with a nonprofit. We are equal. I am making a contract and I am contracting with this person to achieve a certain outcome.
I'd also say, if I were to ask you, Andy, gee, what's the most important thing that you would like to be working on? I'll fund it. I can have you write it up, or I can write you the check. Why do I put you through the meat grinder? It serves no purpose. It creates a lot more administrative overhead, a lot more burden, we have to fudge the numbers, we got to write this stupid report, and all of the amount of time you can look at our politicians who spend so much time fundraising and not doing their work. General support allows them to allocate it to the way they think it's most important, which is what I was asking for in the first place. So let them decide.
2 more things. You wouldn't invest in Google and only invest in Gmail. You don't invest in a company and say, I only want one product line or one service line, because they have thought through the complexities and intricacies of the market that they're operating in, the many forces that are dynamic, where they can have a good play and where they can't. It's actually trusting the leadership and the insight and the knowledge of those and vetting that. Do I trust these leaders not am I a better expert than they in the work that they're doing. And second is it actually makes you a better donor than a lot of other donors. We are at the point where most giving is restricted. So your giving goes farther and has more impact because it is unrestricted, because of the restrictions of others. You make a stronger organization, and it becomes a sign of confidence when they can turn around and say, John believes in me so much, he wrote a check to just support us. Will you do the same? So when you do that, you allow them to share your story of unrestricted to support to keep building.
Let me add something to that. So what Jason's just said, I think, if I can summarize accurately, I hope, is that you want to be hyper-focused on the people who are involved. Hyper-focused. You want to be able to trust those people and their ability to make the right decisions. Part of what I do in my business is I buy into early-stage companies, and the guy who runs this side of my business for me, I tell him routinely that the people are way more important than the product. I don't want to hear about the product until I know that the people who are behind it are really substantial. And I think that's basically what Jason is saying. Find people you trust. Let them do it. They're doing it 24/7. They're going around the clock, and they're into the whole mess on a granular basis. Whereas you, as the donor, don't begin to try to understand what they're doing. It's usually so complex.
I'll add maybe one more thing. I got involved in a documentary film funding circle a few years ago because the only thing I had ever done with a documentary was watch it. I've spent 26 years in philanthropy, and I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Group of us vetting these documentaries. We all came together. We'd done our individual due diligence. My top choice was every single other person's worst choice. I have been involved in philanthropy for 26 years, and I made the wrong decision in vetting because I had never looked at documentaries. I didn't understand how to look at a documentary budget versus a nonprofit budget. And I share that because none of us, I am an expert and I was a beginner. And it is easy to presume that our expertise translates. If you are the first person, you're investing in crypto for the first time and you picked the wrong company to invest in. So I also think in addition to trusting the people, it's figuring out, do you have enough knowledge to pick which people to trust? And if not, pick the right intermediaries or advisors who can help guide you in that path.
And I want to add something to that, there is a very, one of the things I've learned over the time of Open Road, but also in particular in Louisiana, is that there is a real cultural and racial bias about who we think is trustworthy. So you're saying invest in the people, and somehow, because I'm not familiar with that many Black-led organizations, they don't somehow strike me quite, I don't know, quite the same. So I have learned in Louisiana, and a lot of it is, I just really have to sit there and sit on my hands and say, okay, you guys need me to fund a 3-day retreat where you can all be together and just have space to think and to be. And I'm kind of, you may have picked this up, it's like, let's get on with it, let's move. Well, no. And I need to trust that the people leading these organizations are smarter than I am in this, and they know what they need, and I either trust them pretty completely or it's not a good match.
So it sounds like there's quite a few factors. There is trust, there is expertise, there is maybe some diversity so that you have your risk spread out if you're investing in quite a few things. So thank you. That's great answers. Another question? Yeah. Yes.
Thanks so much. This is a really great panel, and thank you for all the depth of thought that all of you are bringing to the conversation. And I do know, as a leader of a nonprofit organization that works on the front lines of the climate crisis, particularly with Black and Brown and Indigenous women around the world, we face a lot of the issues that you've been discussing. And I will say that, a lot of the cutting edge donors and foundations that we have talked to, we can see this tremendous growth in understanding, racial issues, issues of indigenous peoples. I mean, things have shifted in the landscape in great part to people like you who are pushing that agenda, so I appreciate that. My question is really, with that forward motion, which of course there needs to be more, there's still this minuscule amount of money going to the climate crisis and the front line of the folks working on the climate crisis. So I wanted to loop back around to that point of what can you do as philanthropists? Are there educational programs? What can we do to unlock so much more resources to the work that needs to be done? Because there's so much incredible work, as you've said, going on, but we're short on resources. People have solutions. Where's the money? And how do we get other money involved?
I got to credit Chip that he enabled a guy named Swan who made the following statement: the biggest problem we face with the environmental crisis is thinking that somebody else is going to take care of it. So as much as we'd like to think we could go to somebody and be very persuasive, we got to start at home.
I would say also that not all organizations, there are organizations that don't look like they're working on climate, and they are working on climate. In Louisiana, there's one called the Greater New Orleans Housing Association that is very much focused on climate and climate issues, and I would unpack that, but we're running out of time. So there are more organizations. We don't just necessarily think of them as working on climate, when in fact they are.
Let me say one thing before this thing ends. Go back to democracy and all of that. One of the best things that all of you can do is just remember your voting responsibility. Let me give you a statistic. Worldwide, the fossil fuel industry, which is the big baddie out there, the big bad guy, is receiving subsidies to the tune of $7 trillion a year. $7 trillion. It's been estimated by the IFC and I think the World Bank that we need approximately $3 trillion annually to deal with the climate crisis, to be able to reach the objectives that have been established so far. $3 trillion. So we are paying the fossil fuel industry $7 trillion a year to incinerate the planet, and we need $3 trillion to address this problem effectively.
Okay, we'll have to stop right now because we've got 3 seconds.
Jackie, can you do one more?
Can I take one more question?
Sure, thank
All
you.
right, one more question.
Thank you.
We'll be quick.
Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Thank you. One of the most effective movements in our lifetime was Women's Strike for Peace. Why was that effective? It was effective because you had women finding strontium-90 in their breast milk. You had environmentalists finding their sheep in Idaho dying. And you had disarmament people talking about the insanity of nuclear weapons. Without fax machines, without the internet, you had these 3 concerns working together. And within a few months, we ended up with the Limited Test Ban Treaty. According to John F. Kennedy, that worked. We haven't had that kind of integrated movement of different concerns that all should be making common cause together. You can't separate addressing the climate. No, you can't separate addressing the climate from the geopolitical forces that are going on, from war, from military appropriations, et cetera. So I ask, how can we find a commitment amongst the funders to not silo, but to come up with critical analysis, strategic thinking to bring the disparate groups that want to do campaign finance reform, the groups that want to do clean water, the groups that want to do climate per se, the groups that want to revise the geostrategic military dominant budget. How do we come up with ways of strategically focusing on working together? That would, I believe, be transformative, rather than management by objective, but changing the framework and the strategy.
Well, I would say that it's actually already underway.
Oh,
And this
tell,
is,
count
yeah,
us
so
in.
this is a couple things. One is the example you gave. I also hear often the example of the civil rights movement as a fast and effective movement. it was decades in the making. Rosa Parks did not sit down on that bus without training beforehand. She was trained at the Ella Baker Center. She was trained at the Highlander Center. There was organizing before what made in the news. And we see the same thing today. So we see the Green New Deal is actually hundreds of organizations who have been coming together, the Global Climate Alliance, Climate Justice Alliance. We see big entities. They're frustrating because they move slow, because you have hundreds of entities talking about the different pieces. But you're exactly right, that we have to have interventions on climate, on democracy, on economics, on education. All of them are fundamental and they are tied. What we need to acknowledge is that there are brilliant strategists who are working on all of those, and it is no surprise that they have not made monumental change, because they're also brilliant strategists whose values I don't agree with, but who do have brilliance working against them. So it is about, I would say, not about discovering if that integrated strategy exists, but asking who is doing that strategy that you can back, because there are many underway right now.
Thank you very much. And we're going to stop the panel. You can ask the panelists questions later if you'd like. And I want to thank our panelists today.